for me, nothingness is the space. Or actually, it's so hard to talk about it because of the nature of it. It sort of defies being captured by language. But I think of both existence and non-existence being equally valid. Almost like if you think of like the number line in mathematics, like you have positive and negative numbers, and both are like equally valid numbers. And so nothing to me is that boundary between existence and non-existence. Or so I guess on that number line, it would be zero. Like it doesn't have a value. It's like the absence of a value, but it creates a border between two things or two sets of things. Right? It is the boundary. Like the boundary doesn't exist, but that's kind of the essence of nothing, right? It's like the absence of the thing. Like you have neither the thing nor you're not missing the thing either. It's just like there's no reference at all. So I think that's probably how I would describe my conception of nothing.
Yeah, um, that's fascinating. It's very close. I think that there is an issue there as well, but yeah, for all intents and purposes, we see things the same way. I think there's an important bifurcation to make, and it's nothingness as it relates to the physical world, and then nothingness as it relates to the ground or the fundamental reality. In mirology, the study of wholeness and its parts. So on the whole, uh, to me, that would represent the ultimate reality, or um, I don't necessarily think falsehood is any kind of a relevant concept because concepts don't even apply to ultimate reality. So it's just so fundamental and so abstract that it removes itself from all contexts wherein logic plays a role, wherein true and false plays a role. It's that transcendental or pervasive. So anything that points to that, we usually can use zero or nothingness or void as equivalent terms to point to that, which I just talked about. I actually have two books here about that. You have like Parmenides and the Way of Truth, and you have Zero, a biography of Dangerous Idea by Charles Zeif. Fantastic book. I'm not sure if you guys read it, but there's an important delineation. I think that we keep talking past each other in general as a topic in philosophy, and we don't make that distinction between discussing the world of physics and then discussing the world of abstracts, and like trying to understand how they coexist. Because, for example, if we go with Insync's data logic, at what point does information or data interface with quarks, which is the most fundamental building block that we found in our physics? Like, how do they, like, how does information translate into that? Is a certain quark like charm the basic unit of data? Is it the first? Is it the number one? That these questions, that's where I'm interested at understanding boundaries. So, as you said, Nano, nothingness, the way you put it, I think is a little bit erroneous, but I understand that the mechanism is necessary. That nothingness is the boundary between non-existence and existence. I say something extremely similar, but we use that as a conceptualization for our relativistic world where there are differentiations. Um, because nothingness doesn't exist to begin with, and that's the problem. It cannot separate existence and non-existence, and so the two do not function with each other in a physical way. But we have to we necessarily require physical examples to try to make sense of this. So if we want to stay rigorous to the logic, but yes, but insofar as it behaves, absolutely, it is a boundary. It is a sort of a separation or a container. It's just that you know in and of itself, it does not exist. So that void, that non-existence, it cannot interact with existence, and yet it bounds it together, which is really, really strange. So, I don't really have a gripe against what you said. I just think that it's important to clarify what we mean by using zero or nothingness as a boundary. Would you agree?
So one important caveat I would say is I wouldn't just go say that nothingness does not exist. I think it's
Mm.
also important to mention that it doesn't not exist either.
That's right.
Um,
Yes.
yeah.
It
Um,
exists, but what does it mean when you say it exists? I'm just trying to say is we have to remove physics from it.
so from the perspective of non-existence, you can say that nothing exists, and from the perspective of existence, you you would say that it doesn't exist, because
Yeah.
it's just it's similar to that the paradox thing again, right? Like with the lies paradox, if you from the perspective of the statement being true, then your result is false. From the perspective of being false, your statement is true. It's like that same
Yeah. I
like
agree with that.
it's almost
Yeah.
as if the like that example of the lives paradox is like you getting stuck crossing that boundary over and over again, back and forth as you try and because it's like the lies paradox is pointing to the boundary, and so whenever you follow that pointer, you just end up on the opposite side of it, and you never actually arrive at it.
That's okay. That's the perfect segue into what I was saying before, that from the perspective of void or nothingness, it is true. And so that's why I say that that's a matter of experience, that no matter how much you use language or physical examples or logic, the Godhead, there is no Godhead, in other words, that can truly put a finger on it, because that's the whole point. It is nothing that you can put a finger on. It's something to be experienced. So, and that's where I think InSync and Alexander's work, they make a great job of creating a ladder that can lead one to that experience, and to to play around and to go back and forth from one side of the boundary to the other until you get that understanding as a matter of integration of experience versus just an ability to verbalize it or conceptualize it.
Yeah, I think of like trying to find and understand that boundary, um, sort of like equivalent to trying to like find shadows using a torch or a flashlight. Like if you
Sure.
if you try and point it at it, then it ends up gone. But like you can still understand it by the way that it changes, and you can sort of see, at least if it's a sharp lens, you can see the boundary between the light and everything around it. And so I think that trying to capture it with language is like trying to capture a shadow using a light source.
Yeah, well, the light source creates the shadow, and it would, to me, I would say it's like trying to remove the light source and still keep the shadow. Well, the shadow
Yeah.
can't exist without the light source, you know. And this is why I think there are some ways we can start to parse out methods of like thought experiments that can allow people to start understanding how not to fall into that trap. Like, for example, I came up with this experiment many years ago. I was thinking about this caveman, and how ironic it is, and irony seems to have something to of a role to play. It's interesting, but the statement that a caveman's safest bet for shelter is also the most riskiest. So, a cave, for example, he's outside of the cave and he's on his way to the cave, and his safest bet is also happens to be his most dangerous, because it's also safe for other dangerous animals, right? So before he walks in, it's both safe and unsafe, and I think that's what it's just a very simple reductionist explanation or thought experiment that talks about quantum physics in some fashion, that you have this spectrum of possibilities, and they're all true. Now, insofar as probabilities comes in, you still have a degree of truth on both sides. Maybe it's 2% chance that there's a bear in there right now, but either way, there's still an amount of truth to it. So that's where you start to talk about space and time, because at this time and at this space outside of the cave, you have a certain amount of probability or truth values that exist, that coexist, And until you go in, and confirm or collapse that result, you don't you don't have a result that would be a law of non-contradiction or excluded middle. So if we use that kind of a very simple thought experiment to introduce space and time, um, you can put space and time next to the probability or possibility of zero or nothingness, I think. Because now you just supplant the idea that, okay, instead of there being a bear or not there being a bear, now we're talking about existence as a whole and whether it can coexist with void. And that's where it starts becoming way more obfuscated and confusing because, you know, um, how can existence be and next to, like, because we have the truth value of one, we are around to think about it and to exist. I think, therefore I am, right? Then by definition of logic, nothingness cannot be. But then you start to actually think about existence and myself and the boundaries of that. If the universe is expanding, what is it expanding into, and from with what? Like, from within what? What is it, the boundary of space and time? Is it expanding into nothingness, or is there a larger, supra-spatial temporal construct? And if that is a construct, then it exists. So you have this infinite regress, and you ask yourself, well, at what point is infinity inclusive of nothingness or void, and how does that work? So, like, the more you dig into the physical examples that we can come up with to try to conceptualize the relationship between void and existence, you start to realize you're getting further and further away from physics, and you're going into pure consciousness, you're going into pure experience, and that's where it's too large to encompass any kind of mechanism to reduce it, which is symbolism and language and so on. So that's a bit of a very short, kind of unsophisticated ladder that I've created, just to kind of lead people to that notion. But I think that it is possible to let me say it this way. It is possible to conceptualize what we're discussing here to the extent that it's possible. And I think that data logical data logical metaphysical theory and what Alex's work does is that it does what is possible to explain what is inexplicable.
I wanted to just take a quick opportunity to, I guess, reflect back to you some of what I think I hear you guys saying, because obviously some of these ideas, there's some, like, I think there's a lot of value in this way of thinking, but there's also like a limit in terms of how far I personally am willing to go. And so I thought I'd, take a crack at, I guess, reflecting back what I'm hearing and seeing how that lands with you guys and what you would add or take away or how you would clarify it. So kind of what I heard you say, both of you, and this kind of a summary fusing together kind of thing, but sort of strictly speaking, nothingness does not exist, but it does participate in reality as some kind of like superposition or hyper object. In the sense of like the Tao of the no thingness, right? That thing that's beyond labels and language, and something that's sort of inclusive in a way that transcends, I guess, our conceptual limitations about the world. Like we would normally think of, I guess. So sort of, and this is what I mean when I say sort of strictly speaking, nothingness doesn't exist, because what I understand that bit to mean is like, according to like our concept of existence, nothingness just doesn't, it's just not, it's not a fit there. It just doesn't, but then there's also some sense in which you guys affirm that, well, nothingness actually does play a role in reality, but that role is in some sense meta existence or beyond existence, and serving as some kind of context or that's why I use the term hyper object or superposition also comes to mind in that, it's like this thing that, I don't know, integrates the opposites, there's some sense of continual integration of opposites until you get some sublime ultimate union thing that also includes everything that doesn't exist or something like that. So yeah, does that rhyme with your conception? Or
that resonates a lot. Like what you just said is precisely how I would word it, because like I'm gonna let Nano react to it first. I have to digest it a little bit more.
Yep. Yeah. I think I would. It's so hard to clearly articulate what I think, but I think you're definitely along the right track in terms of digesting what we've been saying. For me, I would say that it's almost as if the existence can exist because of that boundary or void. Like without that distinction between existence and non-existence, like existence itself would be like meaningless. Like both. It's also the other part that makes it so tricky is that when you're trying to talk about this line between like these concepts, it's very difficult to not end up with artifacts in the mapping process that like as a result of just how we map our environment with language. And so like when we often talk about like things like being meaningful and stuff, it is commonly referring to that mapping between like the language that we have and the language parts of our brain and the experiences. Like, and so I've really struggled to clearly articulate it without introducing a bunch of those artifacts of just that are just a result of trying to use language to describe the thing that makes language possible. And so
a gesture towards the ineffable.
And so one way that I've tried to go about it is like if I was to like if someone was to ask me like if there is such a thing as like a god or a creator, I think the only sort of half satisfying answer I could give would be that I think that this boundary between existence and non-existence allows existence to exist and non-existence to not exist. And so in some sense, like you could say that like that nothingness, that boundary or void is, I guess, filling that role that one would typically put like a creator or God in. I wouldn't go as far as to saying that I believe in a God, but if I had to try and describe what I think one would be, I would point at the thing that I can't point at. And so like, I think that boundary allows existence to exist. And in that sense, it is similar to some kind of, not creator, but like, I don't know how to, I'm losing my train of thought.
Yeah. I can maybe step in there insofar as bringing God into the discussion. I think that the God archetype is a very useful one. So however you define God to be, an all-powerful force, or a personal consciousness that is aware and has intention, yeah, this I don't think is quite relevant or necessary to bring into this conversation at the moment, for the purposes of understanding the metaphysics at play here, but it is important insofar as it's a pattern that I've realized occurs within this kind of community. I've noticed it in myself in the book that I wrote, but I also noticed it in you, Matthew, in your paper, and a lot of the people who touch on these, on metaphysics, that there is this need to place yourself, and you're not even doing it consciously, but there is this need to place yourself as the Godhead in order to understand or encapsulate reality, to understand how it works, or to be able to say something about it in the ways that we're talking about, nothingness and existence and so on. So some people get stuck at that Godhead because it's like radical solipsism. And when you get stuck at that Godhead, it can be bad for your personal life, obviously, because then you have no more capability to separate yourself or include yourself in the reality that you're saying or that you're seeing. So God, I think, can be justified insofar as we have an experience of us creating in one way or another, whether you say that I create a house using my two hands with some wood, or I'm creating an idea that can be applied in the universe, like some mathematical equation that allows me to send a rocket to Mars or something, that creation does exist. It is an intrinsically important part of consciousness and how it exists. And if you equivocate that to a global consciousness that transcends or encompasses all of human consciousness and animal life and so on, then you can take the Berkeleyan view that God exists and that does have intention and awareness and so on. So you see what I mean? If you create an equivocation between human life and human consciousness existing in the world, then you can say that God does exist. It's just a matter of semantics at that point. But do you see what I mean? Where I'm going with that?
It used to remind me of where I was originally going with why I brought the God thing into it, which was to say that like it's sort of another linguistic device I use to point at that boundary of existence and non-existence, and because I can then use that linguistic device to say that the non-existence of that God or that boundary sort of allows existence to exist.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the same idea I've heard you say a few times in the past 10 minutes, Nano, and I wanted to, again, offer like a reflection of what I hear you saying, which is, and I think this line of reasoning makes quite a bit of sense. So, but I heard you saying existence only has a definite meaning in the first place because of non-existence, in that if it weren't for non-existence for existence to be different from, then existence in some sense couldn't be there at all, or something like that. Is that along the right lines, or how would you?
Yeah, so it's sort of like anything, the way that the things on either side of that boundary or line are sort of defined, and this is why it gets confusing with the linguistic thing, because we have the definitions of words, and then we have the things that we're trying to point to with those words. But the way that those things are defined are relative to all of the other pieces that we're mapping. So like existence is like all of the things that don't not exist. And in the same sense, like non-existence is all of the non-things that don't exist. Like it's like a very like a thing is defined by all of the things it is not, essentially. And so like without the and even like that's where it gets also confusing, like a thing itself, like the word thing, then when you like it, you have to start like talking about non-things, but the way that we conceptualize of things is that basically all things are things, but even the non-things, because our language is only designed for working with things, well, we refer to the non-things as if they're things, and it just breaks down.